When the choice seems to be to tear down the church
or build a wall around it,
we aim to walk the narrow road of nuance
through the wilderness between the warring factions
and try to figure out what it means
to love God
and people well.
I remember a movie came out called To Save a Life, and it was the first Christian movie I remember seeing where there was cussing. There was a little bit more real stuff in it, and I remember it having a huge impact, and churches even being willing to show it, even though some of those things were in there, because of the message that it carried. I think of Ragamuffin. Ragamuffin's a pretty real movie. I'm not sure how many churches would just play that, partially because it portrays a hero of some people's as a little more real than they may want to realize. I personally like Rich Mullins, and I like it for that reason, but that movie has had a big impact on me when I watched it, because it's a little more real, than a lot of what you see in the Christian movie scene.
I went to a conference my senior year of high school in Los Angeles, of all places, and it was like a Christians impacting in the media kind of thing. Now, on paper, that sounds, at least now, having seen a few things on paper now, that if you pitch something like that to me, I'd be like, I don't think so. But basically, it was a whole bunch of Hollywood people, or people who lived and worked there, and it wasn't like there was no Christian movie industry at the time, really. And this is like 2004, I guess it would have been. And there
still isn't in 21.
Well, I mean, no, this is, we're post fireproof, or post war room or what have you now. And I don't, I'm not saying that to cast judgment on those movies. I just mean that this was even before those things happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, but all these people were saying things like, they were making real movies. Like, I had to put it that way, and they were saying things like, no, you got to show real stuff in there. You got to, it can't be like all tidy and stuff. The realness of it has to come across, or the message doesn't mean anything. And this was very new to me, honestly, in our little group of Arkansas, private Christian school kids.
Yeah.
We're like, and I remember, there was this one filmmaker in particular who was pointing out the R-ratedness of the Bible and saying, look what Paul is saying. He says these people that he disagrees with that they need to cut their penises off.
Yeah.
Like, that's in there.
Yeah.
So, this is, what are you going to do? And I forgot where I was going with that. Or even things like, at that point in my life, I was very much about, no, it needs to be not necessarily explicit, but your message needs to be clear, and it shouldn't be like kind of vague, or we shouldn't be watering it down, because there were a whole bunch of bands that were like, they'd be positive message bands, and they'd have songs that were like, is this about God, or is this about a girl? Or, they were trying to do the 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing, I think. A lot of them. And I remember talking to one of the folks at this conference and saying, I just don't really respond to that. And his take on it was like, well, that's better than, have you heard what else is on the radio? At least it's not celebrating some of this other stuff. So maybe it's actually a good thing. It was just, it was a lot of perspectives that I hadn't really been exposed to before. And it stuck with me.
That's interesting, because we want to portray God as real. But then
I don't think we do, but continue.
We don't. No, you're you don't think we even want to?
Yeah.
That's another statement. Now you got me thinking. Yeah. It's okay. So let me rephrase it. We should want to. We should want people to see the true saving power he has, the true, majesty, like the just. We should want people to understand fully who God is. And you're not going to do that through a movie that's cheesy. I'm not sure you're going to do it through any movie, but you're not going to do it through some, scenario that's unbelievable. I think the best thing we could do is allow people to tell their dirty, crazy, scary stories of their life and how God changed them. But in an attempt to keep things PG and not unchristian, so to speak, we censor people.
Yeah.
And when you censor people, you don't fully understand what God's done in their lives. Or if you put them in a position where they feel like they can't be honest about who they've been or where they've been and the dirtiness in their life, you don't fully comprehend the fullness of the gospel and what it is and what God has done.
Yeah. So this episode is interesting in that we're jumping in before we introduce the conversation.
Yeah, I was about to say, do we want to start or what are we?
But basically, what Ryan and I have been kind of knocking back and forth the last couple of months, really, is that we want to talk about art made by people of faith or followers of Christ or Christians, whatever label you want to affix to us. In that we serve a God who identifies himself primarily as a creator. Mm-hmm. He uses it, the scriptures use that term a lot, and you find him doing a lot of creative things. And he invites us to partake of his creativity and to use it to create beauty that reflects his goodness and to offer that back to him as a sacrifice or as an offering or what have you. And Ryan and I both have had many experiences, good and bad, with art made by people of faith. And I think it's fair to say for both of us, it's a really integral and kind of central part of our lives and our walk with God, really. I relate very strongly to God through things either that I have made or that other believers have made, or even sometimes that unbelievers have made. And I think that's intentional, and I think he designed us to relate through creativity in that way. But man, a lot could be said, good and bad, about those things. And so we want to spend some time kind of in this episode talking about generally some of the things we'd like to explore and what they mean to us. But we're going to talk to a whole lot of different people about these kinds of things. We've got some folks that we've already reached out to, and then some others that we're going to, and to try to bring them into the conversation. People who make art that we respect or has meant something to us, and hopefully to enrich the conversation that way. Do you have anything else to add by way of intro there?
No, that's great. I mean, I think you kind of called it out. You know, we have a big background, both of us in music, just through bands we played in and things we've done and writing. And so a lot of people there we want to talk about or talk to, but even just exploring things, all sorts of media and all sorts of ways we can create and what that means, what kind of messages we're portraying. And I mean, whether that's right or wrong or detrimental or helpful to what we're supposed to be here doing.
Well, I guess let's start at the beginning, because there are a couple of things I think that are relevant to thinking about this conversation. The first is that the first couple of pages of the Bible, God makes stuff. And this isn't creation ex nihilo. I'm sure I pronounced that. Nihilo. I don't speak whatever language that is. In that you don't find God creating something out of nothing. The description in Genesis 1 and 2 is him ordering stuff. So he separates the day from the night. He separates the land from the sea. He gives times and appointed places to the things in the heavens and to the day and the night, all this stuff. So you see him bringing order into the void, basically. And he continues to do this when he brings Israel out of Egypt, when he sets them apart from the nations around them with the law, on and on and on. He continues his mode of creation kind of all throughout the story of, well, his own story, but also the story of his people, that he's constantly kind of bringing order out of the chaos of the world and using his people to do it. So on the first command, or the first couple commands in Genesis are be fruitful and multiply and tend the earth and subdue it, basically. And it's gardening work. I think that's significant that the first, again, this is before sin happened, before the fall, before anything was bad. God creates, and then he invites humans to share in his creation. He let Adam name the animals. Mm-hmm. And then he said, hey, this is all this great stuff I've made. This is yours. It's your job to take care of it. I don't know if you've ever done any gardening, but gardening is a creative endeavor because you're looking at in my yard currently, there's weeds in the flower beds and there's rocks that need to be placed around the edges and cleaning up that needs to happen and mulch that needs to be put down.
Oh, yeah.
This is all creative work because you have to look at it with eyes that can see what it could be and then plan out how you're going to accomplish that kind of thing. And moving on, I think it's significant that the story of God starts that way. First, with him demonstrating, I'm going to create beauty that I didn't have to cause to be, and then I'm going to invite you to enjoy it and reflect it and participate in it. So fast forward, this is Exodus 31. This may seem a little obscure, but I'm going somewhere with it. I have it pulled up, so I'll just read it. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts. Moreover, I have appointed so-and-so to help him. And I have also given ability to all the skilled workers to make everything I have commanded you. And he goes on to name all of the different things that are going to go into the tabernacle. They are to make them just as I commanded you. And then, I'll get to that in a minute. So, as far as I know, somebody correct me if I've got this wrong. This is the first mention in Scripture of God filling somebody with his Spirit. There are times when he talks about the Spirit being with somebody or maybe on somebody, but not. This is the first time he uses that language. I've filled this guy with my Spirit, and he does it with the intention for that person or those people in this case to make art, to create beautiful things that reflect his creativity. Now that, I don't know about you, that really, the first time I heard that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Again, if we're thinking about in the story of the Scriptures, which is one big long story that is all interconnected, there's no way that isn't on purpose.
Yeah.
And also later in the chapter, immediately after this, God is still talking to Moses, and he's talking about the Sabbath and how they are to observe. And he kind of caps off his talking about the Sabbath by saying, it will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. I also don't think it's an accident that in this same passage, God refers back to his own creative work that he did. Mm-hmm. So this, to me, when I first heard this, just kind of hammered at home what I had always kind of felt, that creativity and art that reflects who God is really important to him. And he wants us to step into that and be a part of it. And if we are to take the Bible as an example of what art can be like, there is so much depth to it, but there's also so much variety. There's wedding songs in there. There's songs of praise. There's songs of lament. There's beautiful literature, like the original Hebrew texts are just like there's wordplay, and there's what's called chiasms, where like the chapters are constructed in such a way that they can that there's a certain order to them. There's just the thing is filled with all that kind of stuff. But then there's stuff like some of the Psalms of imprecation, where David is just angry, talking about his enemies. And then there's some really gnarly stuff in the prophets about destruction and apocalypse, or there's stuff in Ezekiel and in Song of Songs that's rather sexually explicit. Mm-hmm. And so we can establish that creating art seems to be important to God, and us participating in that also seems to be important to God. And it makes you wonder why so much art that we make is just not that great.
Yeah.
I mean, these conversations, I don't think primarily are going to be negative. least I don't intend for them to be. But sometimes I look around at the art that people of faith have made, and I wonder if this has landed. I look back even at the things that I used to think, well, like when I was at that conference talking to some of those people, and just thinking about, I think my understanding has moved on a little bit from that. So I don't even really know what I'm trying to say at this point, other than I think this is where we start, in that it seems like it's important to God.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's clear within Scripture. I think that's clear within creation, kind of, especially as you pointed out. And it seems like we don't really understand that importance. If you look at what you're talking about, it's not just creating for the sake of creating. It's not just creating for something to be enjoyable, though that's, part of it. You mentioned it's creating for order to be there, for order to be restored. And that's what the gospel is. That's what God's story is. It's bringing back order to a world that's falling apart. And when I look at a lot of the art, even within the Christian realm, it doesn't seem like we get it. It doesn't seem like there's much of a purpose. And quite frankly, a lot of times it doesn't seem that much different from any other art. Maybe it's even a copy in some ways, with just a Christian spin on it. And I hate to use that phrase, Christian spin, but it's one thing to create; it's another to copy. And I feel like that's what we get a lot of these days.
Yeah, and I think it's easier to do that, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly easier to sell it.
I think, and I'm trying. You made such a noble point of saying that you're going to try to not be negative. And
I didn't say you couldn't be.
You didn't say I couldn't. I'm going to try to, but I think you're right. I think there is such an emphasis on selling, on the money of it, which I get it. You got to eat, right? But there's such an emphasis on that a lot of hard truths, a lot of realness, a lot of things that should be put out in the open or hidden, because that might keep it from selling.
Mm-hmm.
That this person's not going to buy this, and this is our biggest audience, but if we do that, if we say that, if we show that, then they're not going to buy that.
Yeah.
In fact, they may boycott us. Look at the culture we live in today.
So our first guest, our first interview kind of in this series is going to be Josh Porter of the band Showbread. And they generated a lot of different controversies while they were doing their thing. And so we're going to talk to him. We're going to ask him about some of those. But one in particular, they had an album that was a narrative. It told the story of two different sister characters and kind of the choices they made and the ups and downs and the kind of pit that they were both brought out of and the redemption that came for them and that kind of thing. Spoiler. But one of the parts of there's some content on that album that got it banned from some Christian bookstores, despite the fact that the overall story was a gospel story, that there was redemption there, and that there was rescue from all that stuff. The fact that it actually included some more explicit situations, it got pulled from a lot of shelves, actually. The great irony of which is that if people were aware how explicit the Bible is at times, you'd have to apply the same principle and it couldn't go on the shelves either.
I think there's going to be some tough conversations. Again, I think there's a lot of people who maybe even listen to this podcast who it might make uncomfortable to think through this. But, as we were kind of talking about earlier, and it may be where we end up starting this or in it, we kind of started talking and got going. But if we're not willing to be open and honest about these things, then we're really not conveying the power of the death of Christ, the power that he has. And I mean, personally, it gets me at times. I don't want to say it makes me angry, but at times I get heated about just thinking through that and thinking about the idea of what the Bible says. There's none of us who are good. We are all sinful. We're all deserving of death, But no, let's hide anything that might make us look bad.
Yeah.
And let's not let people see that. No, that's the opposite. We're supposed to go tell everyone who we were before and what God did in our lives. Not sweep it under a rug so we all look like good Christians.
And it's, man, it's hard to know how to respond. There's so much there.
Well, and I say that, and I may be jumping too deep too quick. I think there are a lot of things, when we started throwing around the idea of doing a podcast, we made a short list of possible topics. And one of the things I threw on there that I thought would be interesting to cover at some point, and maybe we will, what was the idea of things we say we believe as Christians and are willing to stand by that, but then the actions that we have to contradict that. And part of that list was, things like legalism, things like, what Christ's death covers and not being able to lose that. But then our actions at times in regards to things may contradict that. And when it comes to salvation, I think we're all willing to say that there's nothing we can do. There's none of us who are good, that we are helpless without Christ. But we sure do not want to ever appear that way.
Yeah.
And we're sure quick to point out that someone's faults, maybe they're not what we thought, or maybe they're. And so I can get a bit passionate when looking and thinking through it, just even thinking how everything ties into that, including things we create, that we're trying to, hide certain things. And I think there's a lot more good done for the case of Christ if we're willing to be open about who we really are.
Yeah, because I think it's easy, I know because I've done it. It's easy to settle into a rhythm in which you think of yourself as somebody who doesn't need grace. Grace is for those other filthy people over there. I think that's especially, we don't need any help really, but especially in kind of a church context or a Christian context, that if we're honest, a lot of the times is built around our comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And the kinds of songs, the kinds of movies, the kinds of art, the kinds of sermons sometimes even that rise to the top are the ones that make us feel good or feel just bad enough to feel good, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's easy to admit on paper, oh yeah, I'm a sinner, I need grace, but it's different to feel it. It's different to look around your life and see the holes that God is plugging. Mm-hmm. Or, by contrast, to see the doors that you've locked and you're not going to let him in. And that's really uncomfortable and really painful, honestly. And why would I want art that reminds me of those things?
Yeah.
Why would I want to watch a movie that I can see myself in and be like, ooh, that dude's having a hard time? Or why would I want to listen to a song that deeply convicts me of sin I need to repent of, or patterns of behavior or a mindset that I need to leave behind and let God change? That doesn't sound like fun, does it?
No, not at all. And I think that's dangerous because, think about the people creating that and being honest, and then the people who they associate with closely and who are taking in the art, shutting them down and canceling them, so to speak, because I don't like how you said this. Mm-hmm. And I know you and I have discussed a number of people we've looked up to musically and, creatively who have abandoned the faith, so to speak, because they don't feel like they can be real and associate with that at the same time.
Yes. So we've both written songs over the years, and I don't know about you, but there have been times when I've written something that either that moved me or I thought really captured what I was trying to say, but also simultaneously had the thought, like, you could never play this in church. And I don't just mean because of the style of music, but but thinking things like, would this make any sense to people in that context? Could this be useful in a gathering of the people of God? And then concluding that not as we do it, probably.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that? And then you find yourself like, well, I guess I'll go play it in a bar because people will be open to it there.
Yeah.
Which is what we ended up doing.
Willing to associate. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's completely true. I mean, that's the thing. You have something to say, and if you feel like you can't say it to one group of people, the options are just to not vocally say it, but keep those thoughts there brewing in your head and making you go crazy, or to find someone who will listen, and take that. And I mentioned to you, there's a band that, well, actually, you and I were both at that show. There's a band that I had never heard of before, but they opened for a group we went and saw, and their songs obviously hinted at, that them having a belief that was now not a belief of theirs. And we're talking about the church shutting them out and only caring about, them turning into this one thing when there's something else. And there's a point where, people aren't just going to sit around and feel that way and try and they're not going to change the art they've been burdened to make. They're going to go find somewhere they can make it.
That's interesting.
And if you can't be real in the church, then you're not going to. You're going to find somewhere you can, or you're just going to be fake.
We've talked about deconstruction and entrenchment and disengagement quite a bit. We had those 3 episodes, and I think another reason that people deconstruct is what you just said, is they don't feel like they can be themselves. And so they look for a system of belief that allows them to be. The danger, of course, is that you recreate God in your own image and you don't realize it, or one of the dangers. But I think a lot of the people who end up in that spot, or who go down that path, however you want to put it, are because they're searching for a way to be authentic and to connect their faith to something that they feel like is alive without compromising themselves entirely. When you and I were younger, we're in our mid-30s now, and when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, even on into my 20s, there were a whole lot of local bands comprised of people of faith. And there were a lot of opportunities and outlets and venues and events for those bands to play. That is not at all the case anymore. And what there is you can be in a worship band. And even that phrase we're going to have to beat up on at some point. But anyway, we'll return to that in a different episode. But I realized, well, the only thing that you're handed, if you are I say the only thing, by and large, the only thing that you're handed if you are a younger person of faith who wants to create music, for example, is that you're going to be playing worship songs in church. And that's pretty much it. Yeah. You'll find occasionally people who will start to write songs and they'll go a different direction with it. But either you're going to find them playing in coffee shops and bars, or what? Like, I don't even know what a young person who wants to create art for God, who doesn't feel called to lead the church in praise of God, which is also which is a noble calling and is necessary and a good thing. But I feel like that we have elevated that to, well, this is what you do. You don't do anything else. If you want to praise God, this is the way you have to do it. And I've actually heard people say that, or to tell other people that, like people who had musical talent or were writing songs or were pursuing a career in music or what have you, and were told by people, man, if you want to honor God with your talents, you need to be playing in church. And of course there's truth to that. But I think by limiting ourselves to only one mode of expression, we miss out on all the depth and the richness of engaging with real life through the lens of the Spirit and the mind of Christ that God intended us to. And if we're only writing songs for the people of God to sing to God in a church setting, I that's just such a narrow way of viewing what the possibilities are. It's an oddly kind of stifled response to the infinite creativity of the Creator.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's using your gifts to edify the church, which, like you said, that's noble, that's great, but maybe there's more to that. You know, if you're given a talent to write songs that make people think about how big that can be, how that can be used. You know,
I heard one guy say that his concern about the kind of the overarching kind of ubiquitousness, if I can use that term, or of praise and worship music, is that he was concerned that the church was losing its prophetic critique through its art, in that if there isn't room for the lament, if there isn't room for the imprecation, if there's not room for the prophetic voice that calls the people of God to account, well, that you're missing out on all those traditions that are very present in Scripture, but there isn't room for them in your church experience. Where does that leave us?
Because there's purpose in those things. You know, you read Lamentations and as full of grief and whatnot as it is, that there's a purpose for that, and there's a reason to go through that, right? I mean, and you're right. I think we're creating an atmosphere and an environment and a culture where if something's not good or uplifting or clean, then you just shut it out.
Yeah.
Now, that's not dealing with it. You mentioned belonging earlier, and I think we've mentioned probably in kind of our other set of podcasts that the Bible was created to be taken in within community, and large parts of it. And I think thinking through that, you've got people wanting to belong, trying to create art and share with a community, but if they never find that, if they never can have a community with which they can be real, they can study the Word, even be honest about things maybe they're wrong about, so that something can come of that. If they don't have that, then you're just kind of out there with nothing, you know? And that's not how God designed us to be. Created us to be.
And I don't know if your experience reflects this, but you find that your perspective often is very unwelcome.
Yeah, I get that at times.
Well, and just, and when I was younger, of course, I can look back and see this now. I was pushing for the sake of pushing a lot of the time. But, call it youthful indiscretion or just, I was a young man, as many of us have been. And, there's that kind of ruddish quality of like, you want to challenge things just for the sake of challenging them. That, of course, that was there. I can own that. But also, I think there was an honest desire to figure out, so what does God want from us as kind of, if I can borrow a term from C.S. Lewis, as sub-creators, as creations of His that He wants to create things to reflect what He is like. And what do you do when the community that you're a part of, that is supposed to empower and equip and encourage while also being edified and built up by what you create, is not interested in creating in giving you the space to do it? You mean you haven't figured this out?
No, I have not. Well, I think we think of the word explicit and think just immediately negative, and explicit can mean putting things in such a clear way that they cannot be confused.
Yeah. That's good.
And so I think sometimes that means taking a little more of a drastic measure. I heard a story about a pastor, I believe in Arkansas, who was at a church and was basically just talking about the lost and talking about what was going on. And I think he was probably pretty obviously annoyed that there wasn't really a sense of urgency for those who were lost. and basically just flat out said, you know what, there are people in this room going to hell, and you don't give a about them. Mm-hmm. You know, and he said, in fact, most of you are more concerned about the fact that I use that word than you are about the people going to hell.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that story as well.
And I think it was in Arkansas. Maybe I'm wrong.
And it may be apocryphal for that matter, but it illustrates the point.
Yeah. I mean, and the point being, we get so caught up on things that really, really don't matter. And we lose sight of what's important. And sometimes it takes a snap for us to really, really pull ourselves around. You know, I think even more recently, are you familiar with King's Kaleidoscope?
Yeah.
You know, he used a word in a song that, again, you know, might not have been the best thing, but when he explained it, it was, that is the only word I could feel to really capture the extent of what I was going through at that time. Mm-hmm. And I think it was about, and I could be completely wrong. I think the song was about him going through maybe a miscarriage of the family or something, and just being in a bad place. And again, maybe I'm wrong on that, but and that's just the only word he felt that captured it, you know. And so I don't know. There's times where I'm even like, what do you say to that? Like, who am I to say that, no, you're wrong? That word doesn't completely capture the amount of grief you're going through.
Yeah.
It's not my place to say. Now, yeah, maybe it's going to cause some problems for you with sales and with, you know, now you have to have two versions of the song because you got to have a clean one for the radio if you're going to get radio play.
Yeah.
But
I think the point is that it forces you to pause and reflect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the problem. We don't want to do that. Yeah, we don't want to actually think through things. You know, we want to have them handed to us in a clear, easy to dissect way that doesn't really make us think about things we don't want to think, or push our understanding at all.
If we look to the story of the people of God in the Bible as a blueprint for how this is supposed to work, God starts off gentle. Mm-hmm. First of all, he lets you know ahead of time, okay, now, here is what's going to happen if you play ball. It's going to be good stuff because that's the nature of the good world that I have made. If you fall into the rhythm that I've made, good things are going to continue to happen. I mean, obviously, we live under the sun, so there's some bad stuff going to happen too, but I'm going to respond. I'm going to bless you, you know, whatever that means exactly. Yeah. Now, if you don't play ball...
when you don't.
Yeah, well, yeah. Then it's not going to go so well. Deuteronomy is a good example of this. At the end of Deuteronomy, he lays it out. I think this is in 31. And Moses says, I've laid before you, you know, blessings and curses, and it's your choice which one you want to have, basically. But God doesn't start... I think this is a misconception about the Old Testament specifically, is that God was grumpy and looking to zap people. Whereas if you actually read it as the story that it is, he starts like decades before he gets, quote, angry. And he's like, hey, y'all might want to quit that. Yeah. And then he sends prophets who also say, hey, you know, God really does not want to have to discipline us, which is why I'm here. Here's maybe some things we should do differently. And this cycle just repeats over and over. So like, Nineveh is a good example. If you look at the history of the timeline between when they were warned and when something finally happened, it was 150 years or something. That's pretty long suffering on God's part. And it's just full of stuff like that. And the reason I say this is that those moments when the prophets are being really harsh or really explicit in their description of Israel's idolatry in books like Hosea and Ezekiel specifically. It's not like God came out of the gate with those guns blazing. You know, like he in good faith started with gentleness and with compassion and said, hey, you guys are my children. You really need to stop that. And it's only after years, decades, hundreds of years sometimes of just flipping him off that he's finally like, okay, I cannot make it any more plain than this.
Yeah.
And I wonder, but that what you said a minute ago is just that we just don't want to hear it, because if we heard it, if somebody actually told it like it was to us, then we might have to actually do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and maybe it's even like a probable deniability thing. Like, it's one thing if in scriptures it said, well, they were being kind of bad, so I punished them. It's another when it says they were inventing new ways of doing evil. Like,
oh, yeah.
Think about the difference there. It's like, oh, okay, no, there's a big difference there. I think if we really want to understand, you kind of want that. You should kind of want there to be some depth there and some intent to see, like, really how bad this is. So you don't go off thinking that God's just zapping anyone and everyone.
Mm-hmm. And most of the time, getting back to the creation thing, most of the time his method of justice is not zapping people. It's letting chaos happen. So like the Deuteronomy thing, he says, I'm going to protect you from your enemies. The crops are going to grow. The animals are going to leave you alone. Like, chaos is not going to be able to mess up what we have going on here. Mm-hmm. If you don't do what I ask you to do, then I cannot protect you from the chaos trying to destroy you. So your crops won't grow. You will be invaded. That hand of protection is not going to be there. And I don't want that for you.
Yeah. It's that battle between order and chaos that's been there since creation.
Exactly.
Since Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of the way that we reflect what God is like is by looking around at the chaos of our lives, of our choices, of our relationships, of the fallenness of our world, of, aging and disease and all this stuff. And we find a way, we make a thing that reflects the redemption that God is working in those things. There's a line in a song by Lacey Sturm, who we hope to have on at some point. We'll see what happens. Making way for the undoing of the death in everything. And I thought that was a great description of what the gospel is. It isn't just you don't have to go to the bad place when you die, but that all creation is, I think as Paul says, is groaning to be redeemed. And that when Christ came, he not just gave us like personal victory over our sin, but he opened the door for all that has been made wrong to be made right and put back into right relationship with God again. And when we step into that, and when we make art, movies, paintings, music, poetry, whatever, that reflects that story, I think that is what God wants from us.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah. I mean, and think about, we talked about a lot of things on the last season, but, I know at one point we mentioned even God has blessed us to be a blessing. Those blessings are not to stop here. He's blessed us with things that we can go out and bless others with that all reflect who he is, and you bring up that line in her, there's a term called redeeming analogies. And that's exactly what it is. It's, you can take something in any culture, in any person's life, and use that and what you know about the Bible to point back to God, because chaos isn't the end of the story.
Right.
There is order. We have the hope that it doesn't end in chaos, but that God does bring order to what he has created.
Mm-hmm. The scripture that says the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies show his handiwork, and there's no nation where that voice is not heard. I remember listening to an interview. This was on the Catacomb podcast, actually. There's a gentleman named Charles, and he's Native American, and he's a believer. And he shared what I thought was a lot of great perspective on what could have happened when European colonists came over here and encountered the native peoples. And he was saying, had they been looking for those opportunities to take things that our ancestors believed and connect them to the gospel, like Paul did when he visited Athens. I see you're very religious. Here's the thing that you've been worshiping, and here's the God that he is like. And he said, if they had been willing to do that, the story would have been very different. But instead it was, we just got bulldozed over, basically. Yeah. And that really stuck with me, because here's a guy who really has a lot of legitimate reasons to be angry, but that he in his wisdom that God gave him saw this is how this could have been and still could be, because there's still the opportunity to treat people that way and to look for those opportunities of overlap, or those redemptive analogies, I think was the phrase that you used. And to cap off the episode, Charles said a prayer in his native language. And it really impacted me because here's at the end of Revelation, it talks about the kings of the nations bringing their glory and their splendor into the New Jerusalem to offer up as a sacrifice to God. And that everything that is beautiful about different nations and cultures and peoples and races, think about Native American beadwork, or, the Parthenon in ancient Greece, or the architecture in Venice, the canals and stuff, or, like really good Chinese food, all the things that we enjoy are going to be a part of new creation, because God gave us the capacity to create beauty in all these different ways. And for Charles to share something that was unique to his culture with the other guys in the room who were white, descendants of white Europeans, but were brothers in Christ, I just thought, man, this is art. And how humbling that he would see fit to honor us with this in this moment. And that really stuck with me. And I think that ties in with this too, that we have to be generous with our stories and with our pain. I think, I've been doing a lot of self-reflection lately about things in my life that need not improvement, but patterns of behavior I've been stuck in, and ways I've been holding back from loving people well, and from allowing myself to be loved well also. And that if we can step into situations and lead with our empathy and our own pain, then and art is a way that we do that. Art is a way for us to be vulnerable about the broken places that we've let Christ into and redeem them. And, listening to Charles talk about the story of his people, which is a tragedy, yes, but then he saw the threads of what God could do there if he was willing to step into it. And I thought, man, this is what a great example to set for the rest of us, that he didn't have to do, but he followed God's leading. And that, I don't know, that really stuck with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just that embracing and not ignoring. I mean, God's story is full of grief, is full of turmoil, is full of things that we don't get. And I say God's story, but just, everything that he has created. And that should be something we're more willing to share. There's a lot more God can use it for than just sitting in our head.
It's that thing of, it can really move you in a way that, a sermon doesn't, I guess. Sermons can be art too, but for me, like a song is a lens. Yeah. If you like, it helps get past some of those roadblocks that you have in your mind and your heart, and lets you feel things honestly with God. And it helps you to see and to process and make sense of things in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. I think the past year for a lot of people has been really challenging in a lot of ways. And there's been a lot of opportunity for self-reflection. And I have found particularly that there have been a few songs that have really helped me when I couldn't make sense of things, and that have helped me to connect to God when I was having trouble connecting to anything and anyone, really. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that the people who wrote those songs and recorded them were open to making something that maybe didn't fit what was on Top 40 Christian radio, or they weren't thinking about whether or not this could be sung in a church service. They were making what I hope was the honest expression of their heart before God. And because they did that, I now have a window into the way that God works that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I'm so grateful that there are so many people out there that have been willing to do that, and that I get to benefit from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Me too. And it's sad, that you mentioned the Top 40 radio. You're not going to hear certain things there.
Probably not. Yeah.
And right, wrong, whatever reason. That's, I don't know that we want to get up into that on this one, but I think when you remove the desire for money from something, from your art, from what you're creating, it's a little different. The result is a lot. Not to say that it may not can be used in that way, but when you're allowing yourself to express truly what you're feeling and not what will make you a quick buck, I mean, it's a little bit, can be a little bit different.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we will get into that with some of our guests, because kind of what we want to do is we want to get a lot of different perspectives from people of faith who make things, whether it's music or film or whatever it is that they do exactly. And especially, go ahead.
No, I was just saying maybe even people that have left the faith, I think that would be interesting to see what role art even had maybe to play in that, or, the unacceptance of that. But
yeah. And I'm especially interested in hearing from folks who are walking the line, in the sense that they've existed to some degree in the church or Christian industry, whether as a musician or a filmmaker or whatever, but then they also have, mainstream appeal. I don't know.
Yeah.
And the tension between kind of like art as career versus art as expression, and how your faith ties into that. Well, like when it's your job to be a professional Christian of some kind. I mean,
Yeah.
So the people that are on our list to talk to, a lot of them kind of have that dynamic, and they sort of have to have a foot in both worlds at the same time. And I'm interested to hear how they make sense of all that stuff and how they stay true to what they feel God is asking them to do, because that's a hard line to walk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited about what we've got coming, and hopefully a lot of the guests that we hope to get. And, we'd love to hear from some of you too, if there's people y'all think of that would be a good fit.
Some of you too? Do you think we can get them on this show?
Hey, man, we're going for it, right? Call Bono.
I don't have their email anymore.
They changed it. It's no longer at Hotmail.
You too at Hotmail.com.
All right. I'm obviously running out of things to say. So.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Well, that's these things. I'm sure we'll circle back to a lot of them and go into more depth. And I'm sure there's stuff that we didn't cover that as soon as we turn the mics off, we're going to be like, oh, I wish I'd said that. But we're gonna hang out on this thread for a while. I think we don't have it planned out so far, such that we know a particular ending spot. We know kind of some of the places we want to go, and hopefully this isn't just about here's what's wrong. Hopefully this is as more about celebrating what great art can be, and that celebrating the people who are brave enough to make it, whatever the cost to themselves.